It's a modern menace. The phone rings, you rush to pick it up, and there's nobody there. Silent calls can be frustrating and also frightening for people who receive them regularly.
Certainly can, and many of these calls are computer-generated, made by telemarketing companies. It's a story, of course, we've been closely following here on Breakfast. And today, Graham Satchell reports exclusively on how the industry is trying to put its house in order.
Hello, John Abbott.
It's a silent menace. The phone rings and there's no one there.
Hello.
John Mabbott has been plagued by so-called silent calls.
These calls were kind of like a telephone torture. 2 a.m. and you're woken up and you're cross and you're worried, and all you get is, "We do not have the caller's number to return the call." It drives you mad.
And it's not just John who's had these calls. Everyone seems to get them. Here are a few people who've contacted us to complain.
I'm the manager of a nursing home in Sheffield in South Yorkshire. We've got 28 residents who've got their own private telephone lines, and they don't know if it's a relative phoning them, and they don't know who it is. They get confused, they get anxious, they really get very disturbed by it.
My name is David. I'm disabled. It's very much a struggle to get to a phone if I'm not sitting by it. You think, well, is it the doctors or hospital or somebody trying to get hold of me? Yeah, it's very, very annoying.
So, what are these calls? They're actually made by telemarketing companies. Computers automatically dialing thousands of numbers a day. Now, the telemarketing industry, worth £3 billion a year, has started to realise just how annoying they are. This is the headquarters of the Direct Marketing Association. It's the industry body that represents telemarketers. Today they've produced what they're calling tough new guidelines to try and solve the problem of silent calls. The industry's main proposal is to lift the veil of secrecy around silent calls. So from now on, you'll be able to dial 1471 and find out who's been calling you.
The real problem for somebody at home is that they don't know who's been calling them. DMA members must, through the line, release their number, and also from now on publish that number.
But will things really change? The existing voluntary code already says telemarketers should reveal their number. David Hickson, who's become something of a one-man campaign on silent calls, says 1471 is missing the point. It doesn't do anything to actually stop the calls in the first place.
You're still in a situation where the phone rings, you pick it up and there's no one there. That is rude. And people who claim to be responsible are doing this deliberately, knowing what they're doing.
So today's initiative by the industry may not be enough. John Mabbott is so annoyed he's signing up to the telephone preference service, which bars all marketing calls. Another potential customer lost to the telesales industry. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, the man behind these new guidelines is John Price from the Direct Marketing Association. We saw him in the report. Good morning, welcome to you. So we're just hearing from Graham there. These tough new guidelines are being introduced. We can find out who actually is calling us. But many people, as we also heard in that report, just don't want these calls at all.
Yes, well, we're very keen to tighten up our code at DMA. But obviously we have our members only aren't the ones that are making these calls. The calls coming from offshore and also from debt collectors and from other companies that are riding roughshod over the rules and not really taking the person at home into consideration.
These tough regulations that you're talking about, being able to find out who has called you by pressing 1471, as we just heard from the campaigner David Hickson in that report, missing the point. It's rude when somebody phones you up and there's nobody at the other end of the phone. We don't want the calls at all.
Well, I quite agree that we need to be very aware of what's going on in the industry. As I say, the Direct Marketing Association is taking a lead, and we're keen to make the other parties involved here, for instance, Ofcom, we're keen that they take issues, they take companies that are being irresponsible to book, and also that BT, who are handling a lot of the lines, are also working with Ofcom and Direct Marketing Association together.
Despite the regulations
Yes.
that you're talking about, despite all the issues that we've discussed in trying to regulate this industry, there is nevertheless still this 5% rule, isn't it, that you are, or direct marketing companies are allowed to have 5% of their calls as silent calls. Do you think that that is acceptable?
Well, it would be nice if everybody didn't make any silent calls at all. I agree with that. But the reality is that where there are many jobs at stake here, there's a lot of our economy, £3 billion worth of business is generated through this industry. And if everybody complied with the code that we've set out today, people would only get 2 calls a year, which we think is an acceptable level.
OK, I will just say one thing. When we talk about this, we are absolutely inundated by messages from our viewers who really don't think that the comfort that you're offering is acceptable. We're going to be talking to you later on as well on this subject as well.
I understand that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, we are. If you have been affected by silent calls, do get in touch. And as Natasha was saying, just looking down at my computer,
It's extraordinary.
Scores, I'd say hundreds of you already have. We'll be putting your questions direct to John and also to Mark Harrop from BT.
You can also phone us, 08707 87 87 87. That email address as well is always available to you, bbc.co.uk/breakfast, and the mobile phone text number 07736 100 100. That's coming up at 8:20. Stay tuned. BT alone receive 140,000 calls a month about nuisance calls. Well, Mark Harrop is here to tell us what he can tell us about his customers, and John Price from the Direct Marketing Association is also in the studio. Good morning, welcome to you both. Let's start with you, John, and just picking up on one of the points that Graham raised in his report there. Finding out who is responsible for the call is one thing, but actually you can't stop the call, nevertheless.
Well, we think these new guidelines that we've brought out, we're very, very keen that they are introduced industry-wide. Obviously, we have an effect. Our members, our Direct Marketing Association members, are already complying with the code, which they have done for a number of years. But we feel now, through the new guidelines and this report, we've facilitated a greater cooperation between Ofcom and BT, so that the rogue traders can really be stamped on.
OK, well, let's talk about that cooperation with BT. Mark Harrop, who said 140,000 calls
a month
about this. I mean, clearly a huge problem. What advice do you offer people, and what practically can you do?
It is a real problem for our customers, and what you can do is you can use 1471, as you've heard, to actually see who's called you. You can also take out something called Caller Display, which lets you display the number before you actually answer. But as you said on your piece, that many of the people who've been hassled by this problem have actually responded by registering for the telephone preference service and have taken themselves out of the equation completely.
It doesn't always work, though, does it? I mean, we've had so many thoughts from our viewers this morning about the subject, one particularly from Will Freeman from Solihull. Why should anybody be entitled to call my home without revealing who they are? BT should withdraw the technical ability of callers to withhold their numbers at will. Why doesn't it?
I think this is what the Code of Practice is all about. It's all about making sure that the operators, that the telesales organisations actually do reveal their numbers and are obliged to do so. And indeed, most of the members of the DMA who use dialers, which make up about 10% of the dialer population in the UK, do that. This is why we're working with the DMA and with Ofcom to actually encourage those companies that aren't DMA members to be required to reveal their numbers as well. If BT dials you, there is an 0800 number displayed, so you can call back free and find out who's been calling you. That's exactly the kind of responsible practice we want everybody to adopt.
You touched a very raw nerve there about the people who aren't, the companies that aren't members of the DMA, the Direct Marketing Association. Chris Mitchell from Watford says, will self-regulation actually solve this problem? Won't there always be companies that will ignore any voluntary code of practice? That for you, John Price.
Well, unfortunately, the real world is there are always going to be rogue traders. Unfortunately, in this field particularly, the rogue traders have been able to get away with it for too long. We're very keen that these guidelines are introduced, as I say, industry-wide, not just for the UK, but not just for telemarketing companies, for debt collectors as well, who are within the nuisance call guidelines of people that phone from offshore. We feel that if people really focus on the issue, we'll resolve it.
You talk about the rogue traders, but there's still a 5% allowance, isn't there, for direct marketing companies to make silent calls. Do you feel that the regulations that are in place and are being put in place go far enough?
Well, we're living in a real world. This industry is worth £3 billion pounds a year to our economy. It's lots of initiative and it has lots of employment as well. If everybody complied with the code, people would only get a handful of calls. It would be then manageable.
We're just running out of time. Quick one for you, Mark Harrop. This, I mean, we've touched on it there. A lot of these calls, the ones you can't regulate, are coming from overseas. But Barbara Sambrook says they asked BT, your company, Mark, to block all telephone sales calls. The problem has almost disappeared. However, we get lots from the USA. When I spoke to BT, they said they're unable to block overseas calls. Well, why can't you do that?
We can't. We don't. Sometimes these calls coming in from overseas don't even reveal their numbers, so we can't trace back to which network is delivering that call into our network.
BT, with all its might, can't trace those numbers.
Some of them we cannot trace, and that's why one of the things we're working with Ofcom to do is to identify which destinations those calls are coming in from, and asking them to deal with the agencies and the regulators overseas.
Okay, well, we could go on and on and on. Many, many more queries coming in about the whole issue, also about the telephone preference service. We'll get some details on our website for some of the concerned callers and viewers out there.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us this morning.